Here we're going to visit this old turf farm house and whatever other buildings there are. We won't be able to go inside. They only open it 2 months a year. This is what it looks like. Location apparently. Another cute little house, but I bet it serves a very much different function, and that is a cooling house, a place where you store like we would a refrigerator with the stream running through it. How this wall is. You wonder about this little pathway here. Was it a special wall built up on the right side? Was it ever covered over? There's two newer buildings. They're got furniture covered with tablecloths. I suspect they may be guest houses. Lovely place if you're going to spend the night to spend it in. A B&B with some real historical character to it. But anyway, these are the buildings of the farmhouse. It looks very similar to what we saw earlier. How thick this wall is of stone. By how far it goes back to the window to provide some light. There appear to be sticks used to hold the turf in place on those steep slopes. Imagine this walkway busy with the people who worked and lived here. This wall just a wall for the church to the platform it's on, or was it also intentionally designed to be a little bit of a weather barricade for the people living and working here? Some kind of a pen for the animals. Walkway continues on through here, and over there are more structures, presumably being restored. Always fun to see these rare artifacts of the past. Might have stood here once with their hands like mine is, looking at whatever animals were inside here, talking to them. The mounds, unmarked, probably graves. So many gone to rest. No one knows a thing about them. Even those who still have stones above them, just waiting to be fully obliterated. Constructed so standing on some kind of a wall that's been here to again mark out the church's area. And I'll pan this view so we can appreciate what these folks saw as the backdrop, as the stage for their lives and the sounds. I thought to myself on this trip, sleeping in that little van on cold, very windy, rainy nights, how wonderful it is to crawl into my sleeping bag, to know it's there to crawl into. Exactly how these people would feel on their worst days of weather with snow and wind. They could come back to these stone and turf dwellings. I wonder if everyone who's buried here, there are quite a number of recent ones, as you can see, whether they all worked here, or lived here, or is this kind of a common cemetery for this little region, if you will. The people that live and work and love this land and died on it should be buried here and memorialized as a part of this history. But I don't see myself as having any attachment to any place where I, number one, contributed to its continued existence or anything else. Interesting, because the wall curves out right here, and then if you look, it curves back in right there. why? What was here? This is just too well defined, even this late in time, to have not had a specific purpose in mind. I can only wonder if it was more than what we're seeing. Water flows right out from that wall to the left. The cave just through a regular path across these lava rocks, which fortunately, because they're lava, they have great traction, knock on wood. So now we're inside the tunnel, but apparently it's broken open on the top and we travel a certain distance, because I know the people that came down here were down for more than 45 minutes at a time. As you can see, there's our first big opening. Excuse this pan. And now we got another one we'll go by, and then another one. But the pictures seem to show a huge cavern. It's reputedly the largest lava tube in Europe. They're a little too gnarly for me to want to navigate this, particularly with all the water and mud around. I'm just becoming a coward. But anyway, that looks like the end, unless it dives down into there. And I don't know. Our view on the way back out. Here we can see the restoration going on, with at least the cement down to the rebar, interestingly enough. It's to suggest that it goes even deeper than the rebar. Huh. If that represents a structural crack. The entire top of that column is wasted, which probably means they took no particular precautions on those areas where water would necessarily just sit. When I look at it closely from some angles, there is some pretty elegant lifting or soaring details, like this end portion, including the windows, the way those steps, buttresses, are designed tend to suggest an uplifting, if you will, and again an elegance in the upward sweep of this vantage point. This probably reflects the restoration process. Angle out, square up the lines on the surface and down into the rebar, probably clean the rebar, and then paint it with hopefully what is a water-resistant paint of some sort. See how they've made cuts into the cement down to the rebar to chip out to, as they have on that second column. In many of the places I've been where there's been architectural restoration of major buildings in the past, sometimes a very deep past, it's interesting to imagine that 100, 200 years from now, they'll be talking about this restoration. The front doors of the church. As I look at this, I'm reminded of the different front doors of religious buildings, like the most famous I've seen, the front doors of the baptistry in Florence, but also what I saw in Slovenia, and I'm sure other places. Those all told some kind of a story, but this one completely escapes me. Can't see anything that suggests a human being. All that I can sense is that it looks like those twisty things are vines, and that the other stuff is rocks, but what these individual chunks are inside and what this plane here stands for, I don't know. Whether it's heaven or hell, I don't know if that's somehow in representation. Maybe if we understood the English of the entry door words, we'd have a clue. This is my usual first pan in a large church. Simplicity is an understatement. These benches are designed for that back to swing this way and thereby shift the focus of sitting in the opposite direction. I will probably always call this the Starship Cathedral because it reminds me of such an era. The second aisle off the right, off to the side from the main aisle. I don't know what you would call this, whether it alludes to a cloister, which would normally be on the outside. It's the area where you'd normally find the sub-chapels, which are perhaps represented by these panels, which can be perhaps adorned by the wealthy in some other way. This is the baptismal font. The furniture reminds me of the 60s. The pale blonde, simple lines, particularly of that. The only allusion to history, to classical church architecture, is this stained glass. I don't know if this is actually stained glass or not. The glass has a pixel texture to it. Whether that's really metal separating the pieces, I don't know, but look at those hands. That's certainly looks like a single piece of work with some black lines around the fingers to make it look like they might have been individual pieces, but it really just confuses the mind. Designs on these glasses, individual pieces. My guess is they're painted on to some process. All this on a computer does not, in my mind, seem difficult for an artist. The artistic simplicity of this woman's face versus this man's face. You must excuse my cynical thought. Oh, the world, this reminds me of the white plastic cast Indian heads that I used to buy as a Boy Scout, which we were then expected to come home and paint.